Again, we need to put the record straight, because history's getting rewritten by our media and the rest of it. There's a very distorted view of the history going on. Just for the record, did you or have you ever said there were murders at Hotel Garin?
No, and you don't have to look very far to see that. You don't have to look for any further than for instance, the BBC News website, I think from the 1st of July 2008, where I quite clearly, and it's still available on the internet, where I quite clearly said that unless the evidence changed, there would be no homicide inquiry, because the evidence was of such a contradictory nature that we could not prove that homicide, murders or manslaughters had taken place at Hotel Garin. That's not the same as saying that no horrible crimes ever took place there. There were crimes committed there. There were crimes committed there against children, and at the very least, parts of children's bodies were buried there illegally. Why is another question. But I have clearly been on the record so many times saying that there's no evidence of homicide. There's a difference between saying that we have to treat the scene as a homicide scene, a potential homicide, and then going on to say that there have been murders at Hotel Garin. The former attitude, where we had to treat it as a homicide scene, was endorsed by ACPO and by others as well. And the funny thing is that Wiltshire police, the infamous Wiltshire inquiry, who interviewed me for 5 days solid over 2 periods and tape recorded every single word that I said, were told of all of this, and indeed they, I think Graham Power alludes to it in his somewhere in his either his affidavit or some other document that he produced. He has documentation which showed that Wiltshire Constabulary employed a number of officers to search through every single bit of my media interaction in the hope of finding somewhere where I had said that there had been murders committed at Hotel Garin. And in the end, the officers could only report back that in actual fact, the only thing I had said was that we had no evidence that there were any murders at Hotel Garin. But that seems to have been lost in the wash, and seems to have been lost in particular by the Jersey Evening Post and by Ian Lamarcon.
Yes, so a lot of stuff's getting lost. HMIC reports, the year 2000 HMIC report, where that basically said yourself and Graham Power had, shall we say, turned around a failing police force. That HMIC report has gone out the window.
Yes, I mean, the HMI report before Graham took up his post was absolutely damning. It was very, very critical, one of the most critical I've seen of a police service. And the first one that we received told of the huge progress that the force had made under Graham's leadership. And then when they came back 2 years later, that program of progression had been built upon. And indeed, they were fulsome in their praise for the modernisation that had been carried out of the force. And among the areas that they were particularly pleased with were in the areas of integrity and professional standards. And of course, that was something that I think it was Dick Shenton who had particularly criticised myself for what he said was a waste of money in trying to bring corrupt cops to book. But the HMI were particularly pleased with that. Also, the progression we had made in the area of inappropriate behaviour and in respect of minorities and female officers. And Graham Power introduced all those changes, and indeed, as you say, the HMI reports, which were absolutely first class, seem to have been deliberately forgotten about in all that has happened since.
Well, that brings us on to the ACPO reports, the Association of Chief Police Officers report, who are mentoring you. Now, our Home Affairs Minister, Senator Ian Lamarcon, told us on live radio that he was going to give us a scandal concerning the ACPO team who are mentoring your investigation. The scandal had the context that your mentor, I don't want to name him, but he's a very respected, renowned investigator, was giving you favourable reports so he could get a job in the States of Jersey Police. I mean, is that credible? Is it credible?
Well, for a start, let me just say that anybody who thinks that by giving me favourable reports would earn him favour with Bill Ogley, Neil Harper, and anybody else in Jersey would need to be off their marbles. The fact remains that, as you say, this man is one of the world's most renowned homicide detectives, and he is not in the business of giving anybody favourable reports for the fun of it. That comment reminded me a bit on, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Mr. Magoo, who used to come out into the sunlight and was blinking. But Mr. Lamarcon talks about scandal, and the scandal was apparently that this man was at that time thinking of applying, and eventually did apply for the job of Deputy Chief Officer in the States of Jersey Police. And that is some scandal when you look at what Mr. Lamarcon has been surrounded in the last 15 months in respect of the terrible suspension and the absolutely farcical suspension of Graham Power. Perhaps that's more fitting for the word scandal than the nonsense that he tried to come out with, because he did try to make it seem as if the scandal was something really to do with integrity and something absolutely disastrous, which would forever condemn this man to be associated with corruption, when all it was a load of nonsense. There were three very respected members of that ACPO homicide review team who were appointed by very senior officers in the United Kingdom, and they went through our inquiry with a fine-tooth comb. And they weren't the first ones. I mean, you've got to go back, bear in mind, go back to the actual operation at Haute de la Garonne, where we were bit by bit digging up areas after we had evidence to go further. The homicide search advisors from the National Policing Improvement Agency said that was a top example of good practice, the way that was carried out. And as I remember, Mr. Workup and Mr. Gradwell, in a blaze of publicity, said that they would never ever have made the decision to go in to Haute de la Garonne and excavate the way we did. And the only thing I say that is shame on them, because it was there to be done. And I think that even I caught somewhere in the Wiltshire report, which was hidden away and certainly never mentioned by Ian Lamarcon, where Wiltshire said that they had no argument with our decision to go in and excavate. So the whole thing regarding ACPO, who were on our shoulders all the time and giving us advice and looking at what we were doing, and were very, very positive. Yeah, they did find things that they said, look, maybe you ought to be doing this. And a lot of those things that we did, one or two of the things I turned around and said, look, I don't think this is suitable, and we had a discussion about it. And one of those, of course, was the infamous Gold Group, where, in the UK they appoint a Gold Group of various different organisations. Well, if we had done that, I think Graham Power's already made this point, if I had appointed a Gold Group, I would have been putting some of the worst suspects for this abuse onto our Gold Group and giving them access to all our intelligence and information coming in. Something which, of course, the Attorney General tried to foist on us with the so-called independent lawyer at a later stage.
Well, it's good that you mentioned the Mick Gradwell and David Walkup, because they held a press conference that basically trashed your investigation while the investigation was still live. They also exhibited potential items of evidence on the, to the Sky News. Have you witnessed anything like this before in modern day policing? No, I have to say I haven't. And of course it was changed at the last moment, wasn't it? And where the pressure to change that came from, I can only guess. But that's not the original press conference that they were going to do. Graham Power was told that. I was also told that by a reporter from BBC Panorama who spoke to Gradwell. And, this reporter from Panorama was told that the press conference was simply going to say that they had no evidence of murder, which is what I was saying all along. And then all of a sudden it changed. And they came out with a load of nonsense that they did. But of course, that press conference now has been discredited so clearly and so easily by not only by people like yourselves who have torn it apart, but of course by Bob Hill. I mean, for instance, they said there were no sellers. So not only did they say that I wasn't telling the truth, but worst of all, they were clearly coming out and saying, victims of abuse, you're lying through your teeth. Those of you who say you were abused, you're telling lies, because there are no sellers. There's only a couple of
floor voids, which are so small you couldn't have been abused in there. Well, as I say, a Panorama reporter, his name is Robert Hall, was filmed in the cellars, and it clearly showed the height of him. And then more recently, Bob Hill, Jersey's own Bob Hill, was also filmed, and I think that film is still available on YouTube, which clearly shows that Warkup and Gradwell were not telling the complete truth when they said that the cellars, or voids as they call them, were only 2 or 3 feet high. And that's not the only thing, as you have alluded to, the exhibits that they showed. Well, I remember most of the controversy has been over the shackles. And I well remember those shackles being found, and I well remember refusing to confirm to the media, including Diane Simon, who asked me if I had found shackles. And I remember saying that I was refusing to confirm what we had found. But, Gradwell said these items were rusty metal. Of course they were rusty metal. They'd been in the ground for years. But it wasn't I who actually originally coined the term shackles. It was the builders who found them 5 years before, who told the media, including Deanne Simon, that we would find shackles. And Deanne Simon ran a story in which she called them shackles long before I ever mentioned the word shackles. So, there's so much misinformation and downright untruths that have been peddled as a result of that press conference. And none of the Jersey media have taken any steps whatsoever to try and nail down the truth of that. And I think that's to their discredit.